the newsagents.
It's Friday Q&A.
And we want to salute all of you who've managed to find us to send in questions because it has occurred to us. We've managed to make this incredibly difficult, arguably much more difficult than it needed to be by not giving you our email address at all, ever.
We like to set a challenge for people. Anybody who actually gets their question read out actually has to overcome significant obstacles.
Hurdles.
And that's how it should be.
We're having a party, but we're not going to tell you where or when and on what date.
Do you know what we should have? A P.O. box.
Yes.
I'd love to have a P.O. box.
It's CFAX number 4429.
Send your questions to P.O. Box.
P.O. Box.
99.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay, so what is our email?
It's newsagents@global.com.
Newsagents@global.com.
That's that.
Newsagents
You can tell
at
that you don't do it.
Is
you
it
don't even know,
newsagents
you
at-
don't even know what the email
It's
is.
just double checking.
Yeah.
It's like a Socratic dialogue.
Yes. Anyway, Calvin has managed to send.
Wait, we haven't
question.
said welcome to the newsagents.
Yes, but we haven't had the first question. We do
Okay,
the first
go,
question
go.
first.
So it's all going well. Calvin has managed to overcome these significant obstacles we put in place and said, is there a reason why elections are not digitised? Would it not be easier, quicker and more efficient to count votes this way rather than ticking a box with a pencil?
Yes, it'll be much quicker and it'll be so bloody boring. What's the point of having a totally digitised election, which is efficient, which means that people can vote when they need to, that will fit in with their lives, but what would happen is the polls would close and you'd have the result instantly. What's the fun in that of not being at some poxy leisure centre at 3 a.m, waiting for the count to be declared?
Can I just say that we have nothing against the many leisure centres across the country which are going to be doing sterling work in the next week.
Yes,
putting
and
up-
wonderful
doing counting
returning
all those
officers who
votes.
are going to... And all the counters, we should...
Okay,
big
but
up
does
the
anyone
counters.
think it is a good idea that we digitise?
No, but only
No.
lots of commissions have been looked into it over the years.
I don't like the idea of
And-
digitising at all. Because
Why?
I think there is a greater chance of somebody looking over your shoulder as you're doing it and influencing you in the way you vote.
The biggest reason is that when it's been looked into is that there will be less confidence in the system, and there is for two reasons. One, people will suppose that it's more likely to be open
Hacked.
to electoral fraud, and
The
or
Russians.
hacked from hostile actors. So when it's been looked at many times over the years, and generally speaking, they've
What's
come
wrong
back
with an
to say,
IKEA pencil?
yeah, little Argos
Get
pencil,
on with
Bookie's pencil
Yeah.
behind
Get
the
on with
ear.
it.
Yeah.
Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And we are going to start with a voice note from James.
Hello, newsagents. James here. So I grew up in rural Northamptonshire in an area that voted 65-70% Tory every election. And as a Labour voter, essentially, my vote didn't count. I may as well not have bothered. I then, for about 15 years, lived in Tower Hamlets, which is, you know, the reddest of the red in Westminster elections. Now I live in Hertfordshire, and it's an area that is probably going to flip this time round. And so my vote for the first time in my life is actually going to matter to the result. And I'm quite excited about it. So my question is this. Assuming that a party needs about a 40-seat majority to govern, how many voters in this election actually matter to the result?
James, I would say...
I love that question.
Yeah, I think James has painted a picture, which is the one that many of us will recognise and we grew up with. I feel that things have changed. And this time round, the kind of places that we used to be calling safe do not feel safe. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen on Thursday. We don't know which seats are actually going to turn red. But if the polls are anything to go by, then you're talking about a 40-seat majority. Some of the polling talks about a 200-seat majority, which means people who are living in parts of Norfolk, in parts of Suffolk, obviously around the Red Wall, people who are living in the southeast, people who are living in Dorset, people who are living in Cornwall, all places where you might not have seen things change hands for decades, are suddenly going to be in that new circle of voters who are seeing a different colour at the top of their constituency. And I think that means, in a way, that many more people will be feeling that their votes make a difference this time round, because I would just say the bar for change is much lower.
I mean, it is true that, over the last sort of 15, 20 years, I mean, generally about between 50 and 60% of the seats are considered safe or safe-ish. So that, that means about 40 to 45% aren't. So that is, on paper, you could feel that it sort of means that your vote is less valuable. And that number has been ticking up, by the way, with voter sorting, i.e. more and more the same sort of people with the same sort of voting patterns living in the same places. Seats, both on the Labour side and Conservative side, have been ticking or trending towards becoming safer over time. But as Emily said, it does feel like this election is going to break that trend. And we have, of course, as in recent years as well, had elections which have been similarly seismic in particular parts of the country, a la, say, Scotland in 2015 or the Red Wall in 2019. So there's this weird thing happening where in lots of parts of the country the seats are becoming safer, but there are these moments of profound electoral volatility built into it as well, which seems to be happening more and more. So it's a sort of complicated picture.
I reckon we're going to see more seats change hand at this election than probably, and that's not just because of a Labour landslide. It's also because you're going to see, like, for example, SNP to Labour at this election. That Labour kind of only got one seat, I think, in 2019. They're going to do a lot better in Scotland. So there's going to be a huge amount of volatility in Scottish politics. You're going to see the Red Wall because of the re-emergence of Reform and the way they're doing that's going to. So I think there are going to be many more seats that are up for grabs than we've probably seen in a UK general election for a very long time.
I mean,
so
I would say that 2019 did the same thing. 2019, which was an 80-seat majority, which, let's not forget, at the time seemed absolutely huge. I mean, take your mind back to what happened in those parts of kind of Yorkshire and Humberside, the Red Wall. We had never seen that go blue. So there were a whole load of people who were for the first time experiencing what you think you're going to have this time, which was like, we've done this. And that was really because of the Brexit vote, in essence, which went north to south, let's say, rather than right to left, right? It cut through the electoral system in a totally different way. It shattered our perceptions of what was safe and what wasn't.
There's another thing as well, which is that, I mean, it doesn't matter in terms of the result, and it is sort of cold coming. I think basically nearly always lived in safe seats as well. But there is, and so it's sort of cold comfort in one respect. But I do think, vote share does matter. It doesn't matter, obviously, in terms of the results, in the sense that as long as you get past 326, you're over the winning line, you've got a majority, you're going to govern. But there is always, vote share matters to parties because it does enhance your legitimacy to get a good vote share if you are the governing party. I mean, if you go back to 2005, for example, Labour win the 2005 general election. They get a majority of 66, which was a big reduction from the majority of 2001. They got it on a 35% vote share. Obviously, they have authority to govern. Obviously, they can for 5 years, and they did. But there was a lot of sort of discourse at the time about the idea that because the vote
was shocking. I remember that vote coming in, and it was Tony Blair's third,
which was historic.
Majority, which was historic. But instead of us saying, "Isn't it amazing? Labour have won this. It's the first time it ever happened. This third." Historic majority, all that we were looking at was questions about Tony Blair in the shadow of the Iraq War.
Yeah, and legitimacy.
That was the question.
Yeah,
and legitimacy was so key because it raised questions about all the stuff that he had done in terms of foreign policy during that last term. And I think that became a really, really negative sort of narrative that was told then.
But you play by the rules of the parliamentary game. It's first past the post, and that's what it turned up. All I would say finally to James is, be thankful you're not living in America, where out of the 50 states, only 6 are in play, only 6 are worth campaigning in, only 6 are going to have any money.
We think it's about 100,000 people.
Yeah,
I mean it's tiny.
It's the same trend. Voter sorting over time. States have become safer over time, and it's the same in Britain historically. The seats have become safer.
Right, we've now spent nearly the whole podcast, James, on your question. Time to move on. This question has come from Sarah Kingsley. She says, assuming he becomes an MP, do you think Nigel Farage's next campaign will be to push for proportional representation, particularly if Reform gets a lot of votes in the election, or do you think he will focus on trying to take over the Tory party? Love the podcast. I've been listening since day one. Thank you, Sarah. It kind of follows on from the question we've just been debating.
Yeah, about vote share. I mean, he can push for it. Good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, if Labour get a 200-seat majority, guess which party is not going to be in favour of reforming the electoral system? I mean, Keir Starmer said it just the other day, despite the fact it's actually been Labour Party policy agreed on at conference for much of the time that they've been in opposition. So, I mean, they could push for it. And like I say, there will be questions about legitimacy. Again, if Reform get a very high vote share and get very few seats for it, as happened in 2015 with UKIP, yes, there are questions about the legitimacy of the system, but ultimately it is in the gift of the government to change it.
The flip side is there are people, all over the country, you're one, who have been pushing for proportional representation as a fairer way of measuring these elections, which we get. Imagine if we were in PR now, we would probably have Reform getting 20 seats, 15, 20 seats, more maybe?
Potentially more.
I mean,
they could get up
they
to 70.
could be a substantial rump in the UK Parliament with, as we now know, completely unvetted candidates. I mean, maybe we say, as Macron seems to be doing, come on in. Come on into the Parliament, show us what you like in power, let us see for ourselves. Let the British people see for yourselves what you like in power. But right now, I think the idea of PR is not looking like such an attractive one.
Yeah, but if that's the result, that's the result. I mean, I think that the problem is that in our system is that the Conservative and Labour parties can become radicalised from within. We've seen that happen over the past few years. That actually happens under first past the post because that's what those forces have to do. If in a PR system, the more radical forces exist in their own ways rather than having this endless civil war that happens within the parties.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily an advantage. I mean, you look at what's happened to the AfD in Germany, for example. They're inside the Parliament.
I think if centrist forces cannot take these forces on in a proper electoral system, then you know what? They don't deserve to be in business.
Well, and there you go.
The system currently protects them and insulates them in a way they don't deserve.
Not really.
I mean, your original point is the right one, which is that, just as Blair was in favour of some form of proportional representation until he won a 179-seat majority in 1997 and betrayed Paddy Ashdown, who thought that there was going to be a deal, and Roy Jenkins, and who all thought there was going to be a change to the voting system and we were going to go to some form of PR.
I mean, look at Israel and PR.
Oh, my God.
Look at how that cabinet is held together. There's lots of
Israel has a highly proportional system. I mean, look at Scotland. The thing is, we've had PR in our own country, and that hasn't let in the barbarians at the gates. We've had it in Scotland. We've had it in Wales. Actually,
interestingly,
the main parties
the SNP
have
crashed
continued.
the system. I mean, they actually crashed the system by doing so well that they were
But
the
if the
majority.
Scottish people wanted that,
then completely. I know. But I'm saying that we haven't really had the experience of PR in that sense because, it was something that the SNP worked around.
Let us move on to a voice note from Sally.
Hello newsagents, Sally Perry from the Isle of Wight here. There's an historic change this election, with the Isle of Wight moving from one constituency to two, splitting into east and west. My husband and I run a news publication here and have readers ask us daily about tactical voting as they want to avoid the return of a Conservative MP. The national tactical voting sites say that Labour will take the seat, but locally a primary has been running in East Wight, which found the Green Party candidate to be the people's champion, as well as them winning exit polls from several hustings. Which advice should voters be following, the polling companies or the East Wight primary? Thank you.
Wow, now we're really getting into...
This has got to be for BBC Radio Solent's John Sopel, surely. This is very much your territory.
Yes, of course.
Isle of Wight and
Southampton
Asia
boy.
Pacific, very much your
By the
your
way,
territory.
my career break in London came because of a story on the Isle of Wight I was covering, and I got a phone call after covering it, and they said, come up to London.
So you owe the Isle of Wight.
I owe it made my career.
Well,
the Isle of Wight.
So
So
you've got to
what's your
tell
answer?
them what to do. You're the patron saint locally.
Yeah, but it was
East-west.
about a bloke stuck down a hole that I was
Rishi
covering.
Sunak?
It didn't tell me about voting intentions
Sally,
and
this
a
is not
primary
going
campaign.
in the way that we hoped it would.
We've already
I
gone-
think...
John's going on about a bloke in a hole.
I mean, Bob Seeley has been the Isle of Wight MP and for a long time, and I think he has sounded increasingly like he's going to fight hard, but he's resigned to losing. Who knows? Polling, blah blah blah. But it does look as if both East and West are both going Labour. I don't know if the Greens is your worry, Sally. I guess that you think that the Greens are going to cut into the Labour vote and allow the Conservatives back in, or you're really against a Green MP there. I don't think it's going to go Green.
I mean, the Isle of Wight. Well, I mean, they've been
The Isle
doing
of
really
Wight
well
used to be
locally.
Liberal.
Yeah, and they've been doing really well locally. The Greens. I mean, the thing is, actually, it's really interesting political change going across all that bit of the south coast, which has, it was
The
John was
seawall,
saying,
as we call it.
Yeah, well, has historically been very conservative or, way back when liberal, but with lots of kind of migration, particularly post-pandemic from London. A place like Worthing, for example, which never had a Labour councillor before 2017 ever in its history. Both Worthing seats probably going to go Labour at this election. And that kind of migration, not just from London, but from Brighton as well, going outwards west, making it increasingly progressive and left-wing. But this is a very fancy way of us saying we don't really know, do we?
We don't know.
And we shouldn't really tell people
But
how.
I think that the new red wall is called the seawall. So that's what you should be looking at, because from Worthing west to right the way down to Dover, to Folkestone, Hastings, right,
Eastbourne.
that whole tranche looks as if Labour will be replacing Conservatives.
And that didn't even happen in 97.
Can I say that my first election, when I was at Radio Solent,
Palmerston.
Yeah, exactly, was when I was doing the 1983 election, and I had to go and do constituency profiles. I volunteered for this, of every constituency. I think there were 23 constituencies, and after the election, where it was such a landslide, I think that every constituency in the whole patch was Conservative, apart from the Isle of Wight, which was Liberal.
There you go, exactly.
Interesting.
And then one more from Ben and Jen in Westmoreling in Kent. Hello, when a politician takes up a senior role in government, for example, if Keir Starmer becomes the Prime Minister, what happens to the running of the Holborn and St Pancras constituency? Does the Prime Minister have to balance nuclear deterrence with the availability of local loos, or does a junior minister take in the responsibility of the local constituency?
Once again, we have our own Holborn and St Pancras correspondent.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
Our very own John Sopel. He only lives in Prime Ministerial constituencies, of course.
Exactly.
There was a brief
make point
Uxbridge
of
period
living
he
in
didn't
Prime
enjoy.
Ministerial constituency. Yeah, I'm a voter there. I suspect what happens.
Has he been to your door? That's the question.
No, of course he hasn't been to my door.
Has he been to your local
I tell you
loo?
what, no
How rude.
candidate
John
has been to
Sopel?
No candidate has been to our door.
That is so
I
rude.
met the independent candidate who loved the podcast. And seriously, there's an independent
It's
standing.
a way of you meeting your fans.
Yeah,
They know where you live.
I just hang around on street corners hoping that someone will say, hello.
Tom,
are you
we've,
from the
to-
news
we've told
agent?"
you about that. Stop doing that.
What will happen is that Keir Starmer
won't
will have
ever
a
see
very
him again.
good local office who will run the constituency, who will deal with all the correspondence, and take care of people's housing concerns or litter or crime or whatever it happens to be, that does all the work. And I'm sure from time to time Keir Starmer, he's lucky in the sense that he is a Prime Minister who's got a constituency which is very close to Westminster and close to Downing Street. If you're
Where he
I
lives,
suspect
And
I
actually,
suspect-
to be fair, there are often family complications in that a lot of the time families want to remain where they live and they
Yeah.
don't like the idea of moving into Downing Street, and sometimes it's really hard for the kids to make that transition away from their friends or away from their school or whatever. So I would be almost certain that he will keep quite a strong domestic connection to that part of the world, because I think that will be important to everyone in terms of normalcy of life.
It is a very unique system we have, though. To Ben and Jen's question about having to balance nuclear deterrence with availability for local loos, it is true. Prime Ministers still do surgeries, so they won't do them as frequently.
Can we point you to In the Loop?
Exactly, the In the Loop. I was
In the
literally
Loop,
about to say, the In the Loop clip.
The minister who is anti-war ends up resigning over a falling
He's
fence.
been at the UN one day,
Yeah.
and then has to go back and has to resign over a
It is
falling.
the best example.
But that's
of
what I
the
love
local-
about British politics, that there is this sort of stuff that you cannot imagine the French Prime Minister or the US President or whatever having to ever do anything that is sort of parish pump stuff.
Yeah.
And yet it really does matter that they are in touch with parish pump issues.
Because those are
in
the
their
people that vote you
constituency.
out.
Yeah, exactly.
Not impossible.
Right, let's go straight to a voice note from Dan.
Hi news agents, this is Dan from Liverpool, currently on holiday in Zante. I have a question regarding something I read over the weekend, which is that Labour are planning in their first 100 days to pack the House of Lords with new peers to get policies through. But why would they need to do that if there is an unwritten rule that manifesto commitments are not blocked by the House of Lords? Love the show. Keep up the great work.
I'm going to have a go at this one because I had a very intense conversation with somebody 2 weeks ago, and I think I've reported on the newsagents there, very senior in the Labour Party, who said that's exactly what is going to go on. They will pack the House with new Labour peers because, frankly, they don't want to take any chances of pushing forward transformative legislation that then gets blocked or stalled or modified by a Conservative majority in the Lords. Now, when I sort of dug into this a bit, it's very specific. So they're looking for people who have financial experience, maths experience. You can imagine most of the Labour Lords are of a sort of more of a type. You know, you can easily get human rights lawyers, you can easily get NGOs,
or former trade union leaders.
Or trade union leaders. You can't always get people who tell you how the city runs, or tell you how to sort of, you know, get a financial bill through. And so I think they're going to be looking at that. But I was told that a lot of names are going to be put forward, people that we have forgotten about in the last 15 years who are suddenly going to be there. And yes, of course, the Lords can't ultimately block, but they can slow things down and jam things up and make things much harder. And Keir Starmer is actually sounding at the moment like a man in a hurry, right, to sort of get things changed.
It's very simple. I mean, the Labour Party has not had the keys to the patronage machine for 14 years. And Keir Starmer, the reason the House of Lords stays in its current form, which is borderline corrupt in all sorts of ways, but the reason it basically stays unreformed is because Prime Ministers find it very, very helpful to be able to reward political allies, to have the expediency of occasionally putting someone in the legislature. And it can be helpful, it can be politically useful, and as I say, Labour have not had access to that for 14 years, and there's going to be a lot of people that Starmer in one way or the other is going to want to reward.
And I understand all of that and the absolute absurdity of it as well. There are more Lords than there are members of Parliament. Why is the revising chamber bigger than the House of Commons, than the primary principal lower house? It is nuts.
Because he's going to put an age limit on it. He's going to say 75 and you go.
He's 80, I think.
But also a man who, I think just a year ago, said abolish the House of Lords, right?
Yeah.
Do away with the House of Lords. Now suddenly finding could be quite useful for the first couple of years.
There is a conservative plurality in there. You know, they've had a lot longer to pack it. So, you know, Labour are far behind in total numbers of peers. So they are going to... And this is why it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and swells up.
I think having a cut-off is not a bad thing, actually, I have to say.
No, the age cut-off is a good idea. Maybe someone should tell American politics.
Well, that
would be a
well.
good
That brings
idea.
us very neatly onto our next question from Adam Green, who says, "Hi, newsagents. Greetings from Hong Kong. We really are going around your personal histories today, aren't we? My question dates back to a conversation I had with my dad prior to the Brexit referendum, where I offended him by suggesting there's a legitimate case for a maximum voting age." I can understand why he might be a little offended. "I would maintain there is a case on this on generational issues, especially where the impact will mainly be felt by those too young to vote, i.e. Brexit. My question is, in spite of the fact that reducing the franchise is fundamentally undemocratic, can it be argued for in general elections, and how would this impact a campaign?"
I think Adam's answered his own question. It is fundamentally undemocratic. I don't like the idea. I don't think it's probably very good at fostering good interfamilial relations. No, I don't like the idea of cutting off people's vote. Do you?
No, you can't. I mean, you know, there are times when you say, for God's sake, these people, you know, they have got no stake in the future. Why are they determining whether we stay in the European Union
I mean,
or
we
not?
haven't even solved the West Lothian question yet,
Yeah.
have we? Which is the one about whether Scots can vote on Westminster issues. I mean, that's
Also,
probably...
people are living longer and longer. So, you know, people living to 110 or 15, you could be going decades without getting to vote.
Yeah, but also you could have, dare I say, gaga views at 50 or great views at 90, and that doesn't really have any...
Gaga.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
I think maybe if they are putting an upper age limit, and even that will be controversial, of how long you can sit in the House of Lords, because who is to say, you know, can you be an elected MP and in your 80s, but you can't sit in the House of Lords?
Yeah, but I think that's fine, because you go through the democratic system every 5 years, so voters get the chance to say
but
yes
then
or
you
no.
maybe
You
say
can't be a
time
High
limit.
Court judge above 75. I mean, it's not unknown in public life.
Yeah.
They have forcible
No, but we're just
retirements.
talking about being a voter.
No, I know.
I think we do want to be a voter,
the Lords,
don't we?
Yeah.
Maybe there should be time limits on how long you can be a Lord.
Maybe there should be
that is
time limits on newsagents' questions.
Oh, sorry, are you trying to say we're being long?
No, not at all. I was just a thought.
No, but I mean, maybe, you know, like Boris Johnson appointed, you know, 2 people to the House of Lords who were kind of, you know, barely
It's gone
30
back
years
to the House of
old.
Lords.
You know, maybe they should have a 20-year time limit on how long you can serve in the House of Lords for.
I think we're agreed. It's not a good idea.
Okay. We're
Sorry,
agreed.
Adam.
Sorry, Adam.
But we love Hong Kong.
But you know what?
I would love to have been
Good
in the
luck
room
to your
when,
dad.
when your dad, you told your dad.
Maybe make
Are
him
you
a nice
talking
cup
to your
of tea.
dad?
Yeah. Oi, old codger.
Take him
Christmas
out for
dinners must be an
dinner.
absolute laugh at Adam's house. Anyway, a voice note from Robert.
Hi there. So my question is almost a counterpoint to this idea of a supermajority. What would an optimal majority be for a democracy? And also for Labour, is there a point that they would consider a majority too large in terms of opening the floor for dissenting voices within their own party, and also the obliteration of the Tories potentially leading to a vacuum which could let in factions that they maybe don't want, such as Nigel Farage and Reform?
Oh, great question,
Really,
Robert.
really good set of questions.
Okay, Lewis was listening to the question, and as Robert, you were reading it, he was going,
Salivating.
Oh, I love this. Oh. Go on then.
Well, two separate questions. So on the size of the majority, I think in terms of Parliament working well, probably a majority of between 50 to 60 basically is quite a sweet spot between allowing parliamentary dissent, ensuring the government has a decent prospect of being defeated so it takes in oppositional views, but have a big enough cushion to get through the business and not to be fundamentally unstable. So I think that's roughly, I think, where the majority... On the question of whether the majority could be too big, I do think... I mean, look, no party is ever going to say, no, I'd like a bit of a smaller majority, please, actually. But in reality, I think there are a so-called supermajority, which does not exist in the British system. It's an American concept. There's no such thing in Britain. But a really massive majority, it could pose problems in a couple of ways. One is you can have a coalition which is just too big. You know, it's very difficult to keep because our system is geographically, territorially focused. Sometimes, if you're the Parliamentary Labour Party in this case, if it is so vast and so sprawling, it can become difficult to kind of corral those MPs. So a really good example for that you can see coming down the track is planning reform, right? So one of the only really big radical things Labour is proposing is a proper transformation of planning reform. Imagine suddenly Labour is not just representing its normal seats or normal seats plus, but then representing a load of seats in kind of the home counties around the green belt that it doesn't normally represent. Suddenly it finds they're the ones with the political problems because they're trying to think about which coalition do we try and protect, which group of MPs do we try and protect.
Yeah.
So yeah, there can be problems.
And I think if everyone is on the inside, you end up creating the potential of an internal opposition where you
Totally.
break into factions within the party. The other thing is a question of jobs, quite frankly, because if you have a majority of 40 or 50, then the people that you probably want to give jobs to is much easier. It's a much simpler question. I was asking somebody in the Labour Party if they imagined the re-entry of sort of Blairite peers, you know, around the table getting some of the top jobs. And this person said, I'm actually going to laugh at that. Can you imagine? You've got 300 or something Labour MPs all coming in. They all think they're the next few, you know, the big thing that, you know, what the future looks like. They all want those jobs. Can you imagine the kind of infighting that will create if it goes outside? And I think that is a problem for any leader. If you've got lots and lots of people who all think they're the future and they want the job, yeah, you've got a problem.
If we end up in a situation, and again, Robert alluded to this in the question, if the Conservative Party is reduced to the point where it cannot actually adequately oppose, like it's reduced to a super rump, let's put it that way, a super rump, always nice to see, then you are not in this office. Then you are in a situation where you do open the door, as we've talked about before, to the radicalisation of the party that could actually, in the longer run, destabilise parliamentary democracy. You know, the Conservative and Labour parties, for all of their faults, have been the anchors of British parliamentary democracy for a century. They alternate in office, usually Conservatives in government, but they alternate in the office, and they do provide a solidity and a stability to parliamentary democracy. We've not really been in a situation since the national governments of the 1920s and 1930s when one of the parties was reduced to or sort of nugatory status. And so we would be, in terms of how Parliament works and how parliamentary democracy works, we would be in uncharted territory that could lead us to a dangerous place or a difficult place.
Look, I can hear Labour saying all of these are nice problems to have.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
talking about the size of the majority office. Right.
Is nugatory anything to do with nougat?
Possibly. Do you like nougat, John?
Not really. Sticky in your teeth.
Okay, we'll talk.
Sally. Dear my favourite newsagents, please can you explain how being an independent candidate works if elected as an MP with no party backing? Do they have a weaker voice in Parliament if trying to raise an issue on behalf of their constituents? And when voting in Parliament, are they free to decide which way to vote? I'm asking this out of curiosity as my constituency has an independent candidate standing. I think you know which one. I would love to have it explain how their role as an independent works within Parliament if elected. Many thanks. I hope I've been clear. Well, we don't know which one because there are quite a few independents up and down the country. It might be Jeremy Corbyn.
I think she might be from East London. northeast London, where we were last week, Emily Maitlis.
Well, it might be Faisal Shaheen in Chingford and Woodford Green. It might be Jeremy Corbyn. It might be...
And you can get a full list of candidates via our PO Box address.
Yeah,
PO Box
exactly.
99.
On CFAX. On CFAX. Well, look, I think, if you are voting in an independent who is offering to do something particular, as was the case with the Wyre Valley seat, where in Kidderminster actually, where there was a doctor, Richard Taylor, who said, I'm going to save the hospital. And he just made that his thing. And I think he did. And he got voted in twice more. So it was an incredibly effective, very local issue based around something that he wanted to do specifically for the community. There are other independents who tend to have been people inside the party who've, let's say, fallen out. And I think then it becomes a little bit more murky as to whether they will be voting with the party or what. But yes, of course, their vote still counts.
Can I just relate the question to the previous one that we were talking about what is the sweet spot for a majority? If you are an independent MP by yourself, and the government has got a huge majority, you're not going to get much attention from anybody, really. You're going to try and make your voice heard with, a Prime Minister's question every now and then, press releases, sitting maybe on a select committee, but that's going to be the extent of it. If it's a hung parliament, you've suddenly you're quite powerful, and you're going to be courted by both sides to be, obviously you're free to vote. You don't take the whip from any particular party. You're free to vote exactly how you want to on whatever the given issue is. But you might suddenly become more significant.
There's only 18 seats and one of them's independent, Lady Sylvia Herman last time round, who was standing as an independent in previous times. That's quite an important voice. Look at the DUP. They weren't an independent party, but they literally propped up Theresa May's government when it became a minority government.
I think it is a lonely life, though, being an independent MP in Parliament. I mean, Caroline Lucas has talked about this. I mean, I'm not an independent, as a Green, but she's been the only one.
She didn't mean to be an independent.
No, she would have liked more friends there. But
she wanted Greens.
She wanted more Greens, but she was the only one, right, from 2010 to 2024. She's standing down this cycle. But she, even in things like, she would talk about, and other independents talked about, when the division bell rings, what are we voting on?
Yeah.
So for Labour and Tory MPs or Lib Dem or SNP or whatever, their whips will say,
Yeah.
Oh, very often they don't even know what they're voting on. They'll just say, right, we're voting aye, we're voting nay, you know, go to the voting lobbies, off you go. Whereas, like, if you're an independent, you have none of that party infrastructure. You don't have the whips office.
You don't have a WhatsApp chat. It's a bit like doing a podcast on your own.
You have none of the pastoral support. You have none of those things.
That sounds nice. Can I do my podcast by myself?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
But you have none of those things that just kind of basically make your parliamentary life easier. It's all down to you. So it is. Although the whipping system is much criticised in all sorts of ways, it does provide a kind of like level of support to your work as an MP, which an independent MP,
I'm sure you can be courted. I mean, particularly, you know, in the US, when somebody goes independent, they will be courted like nothing else because everyone needs that vote to, you know, make or break them.
But it's interesting, but even in the US system with the Senate, like when you have someone like Bernie Sanders who's technically independent, they're still caucusing with the Democrats, partly for that reason, right? You want that sort of body together, whereas we don't have that kind of system in Britain.
No.
But Bernie can still be awkward if he wants. That's the point.
Yes, and has leverage because of it. I mean, when Joe Manchin
exactly,
in West Virginia said, I'm not going to be part of the Democrats anymore.
Or Kristen Sinema. I mean, those two were always the people who were wined and dined more than anyone else.
But the Senate's different, isn't it? The Senate
completely.
Yeah.
But in the Commons, lonely life depends on the size of the majority.
So, this is our last one from Andy Stilp, Middleton, Wisconsin. Wow. Greetings from Wisconsin. Question for you. Assuming the polls are largely right, on the morning of July the 5th, is any newspaper going to run a headline other than Starmer for 10? I don't get that.
Starter for 10. Your starter for 10. University Challenge. Starmer for 10.
She found University Challenge is a bit low rate for Emily. She finds it's too easy.
I've never seen it.
You've never seen University?
You've never watched University?
I don't believe... What? Okay, we've got a scoop here. No, I don't believe that.
Thanks for your work. I'll just carry on anyway, Andy. Listening from America, it's great to hear election commentary. That's about insights on issues and voters. I think Andy is British, but living in Wisconsin, because he's talking about this election, not the US one.
Middleton, just round the corner from Madison, Wisconsin.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Madison
just
County,
northwest
the bridges of Madison County.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
What's in the middle?
Lake Mendota.
So, okay, let's do it. What's going to be the best headline for Rishi wins or for Starmer wins? Let's do it
Rishi
both
wins.
ways.
They'll have to... They won't know what to write.
Rishi wins, it's no.
Well, there'll be a lot of crying pollsters.
Yeah.
I mean, God,
Yeah, well,
that will be the
they can
picture of the day.
resign.
And if it's Starmer, it'll say something like, "Here we are."
Here we go.
Here we
Here
go.
we go.
Oh, the Keers to the house. Keers to number 10.
Yeah, keys to number 10. Yeah.
What else? Star.
Through the key hole? No.
Through
that
the key
doesn't
hole.
work.
Yeah.
Look, there's a reason. There's a reason we went into broadcasting, right? Rather than print journalism. Let's be honest.
Next, Hallmark. We are coming to Hallmark to
Hallmark
write your
cards.
birthday cards.
Oh, can you imagine doing
know.
the cloying
Yes.
messages on your birthday?
Just say next
or,
year.
Queen's
Good at
Maitlis.
I don't even understand that.
You obviously do
Bye-bye.
because you laughed at
Bye-bye.
it. Another lie.
Bye-bye.
Another lie. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.